most Americans have learned about the Revolutionary War, George Washington, Valley Forge. But even after the Revolutionary War was over, the United States continued to have trouble with Great Britain for years. For example, the British had a bad habit of kidnapping American sailors and forcing them to join the British Navy. Well, this led to us going to war again, and that war is known as the War of 1812 because it began in the year 1812. But it's also known as America's Second War of Independence. So my story comes from that time, and it's the true story of two young sisters, Rebecca and Abigail Bates, who lived in a lighthouse. And so as I tell the story, I'd like you to imagine that I'm the younger sister, Abigail Bates, also known as Abby. Did I ever tell you about the time that my sister Rebecca and I saved our town from an attack by the British Navy during the War of 1812? Well, the year was 1814, and we had been at war against Great Britain for 2 long years. All of the American ports were blockaded. I didn't even know what a blockade was, but my father explained it to me. He told me that a blockade meant that there were ships, British ships, out in the water to stop our ships from sailing out of port and to stop any other ship from sailing in. So that's why it was getting to be so hard to get the things that we needed, like cloth to make clothing and buttons and tools and food items like flour to make bread, all because those things arrived by ship. Well, my family lived in the lighthouse in Scituate, Massachusetts. Our lighthouse was at the end of a narrow point of land that curved around Scituate Bay. And there were so many cedar trees on this point of land that folks called it Cedar Point. And well, our lighthouse was new, only 3 years old. And my father, Simeon Bates, he was the first lighthouse keeper. And Father, he taught my sister Rebecca and I, he taught us how to help him tend the great light. After all, Rebecca was 20 and I was 15. And in our spare time, he taught us songs. He was actually able to teach Rebecca how to play the fife. He never could get it to make a sound. But oh, Rebecca, she was so proud that she could play 4 different tunes on it. But she always said that Yankee Doodle was her masterpiece. She thought she was so smart, which she was. But I could sing it. Yankee Doodle went to town riding on a pony, stuck a feather in his cap and called it macaroni. Unfortunately, our harbor was being blockaded by 2 British ships, the Nymph and the 74-gun Bulwark. And on June 11th, 1814, those 2 warships lowered smaller boats that they called landing barges down into the water. And those landing barges were filled with British soldiers and sailors. And quietly they rowed into our harbor and set fire to 6 of our ships. And then they stole 3 fishing boats, and then they rowed away. Well, Father tried to help. Like most lighthouse keepers, he had a cannon that he could shoot off when it was foggy and ships at sea could not see the light in the lighthouse. Only now, he fired that cannon at the British ships twice. Boom! Boom! But he missed, and the ship sailed away. Well, they attacked us 2 more times over the coming weeks. The first came about a week later, and then 3 weeks after that, the ship, the Bulwark, made this demand. They said, "Give us meat and vegetables." Well, we hardly had enough food for ourselves, so the town said no. So they attacked us again. Only this time, our militia arrived in time to stop the British from landing and from doing worse damage to the houses on shore. And after that, militiamen were stationed throughout the town to serve as lookouts. And 2 soldiers, they were stationed at the lighthouse to protect us. It made me feel safe to have the soldiers stay with us. And they were nice. One of them had a drum, and he was actually able to teach me how to play it. So now I could play a musical instrument too. And, well, I thought to myself, the British won't dare come back, not with our soldiers here. And I was right. For the rest of the summer, they stayed away. But with the coming of autumn, the militia had to go home because they had to harvest their crops. And one day in September, Father and Mother and most of our sisters and brothers went into a nearby town to buy supplies. And Rebecca and I had to stay here and keep the lighthouse running. Well, after all, Father had taught us how to operate the great light. But, well, neither one of us was very pleased. Everyone else was off in town having an adventure, and we had to stay here. I was particularly unhappy about having to be here with Rebecca. She could be kind of bossy. She thought she was so smart. But later on during the day, I heard Rebecca, who was up at the top of the lighthouse in the lantern room. I heard her shouting down to me, Abby, come quick." Well, I hated always having to do as she said, but there was something about the fear in her voice that worried me. And so I raced up the winding stairs to join her up in the lantern room, and we looked out through the glass windows that surrounded the room. And there in the distance, we could see a ship. And as we watched, the wind unfurled its flag, and we both gasped. It was the British flag. And then as we continued to watch, they lowered those landing barges into the water, and the British soldiers and sailors clambered down, and they began to row our way. And Rebecca, she said to me, "The British, they're coming back. They may try to set fire to the town. Oh, and there are 2 ships in the harbor that slipped in past the blockade. They're filled with flour. If the British burn those ships, we won't have any flour. We won't have any bread to eat." And I said, "But well, there isn't time to gather the men to stop them. I suppose you and I suppose we should hide." But Rebecca was already on her way down the stairs in the lighthouse and into our home, which was attached to the lighthouse. And I had no choice but to follow her down the stairs and into our home, where Rebecca was picking up her fife. And she said to me, "Abby, go get the drum that our soldiers left behind." And I said, "What are you talking about? We have to hide. Why would we bring a fife and a drum with us?" And she said, "You'll see." Well, she was my big sister, and in the end, I always did as she said. So I grabbed my drum, and I followed her out through the back door, and we made our way carefully through the brush so as not to be seen by the British in their landing barges. And we moved quickly until finally we reached a grove of cedar trees. And once there, Rebecca said to me, "Abby, play Yankee Doodle and play it loud." I was beginning to understand her plan. Rebecca was trying to scare the British. By playing the fife and the drum, it would make it sound like a large group of militiamen were gathering here to protect the town. So with sweating palms, I began to beat out the tune to Yankee Doodle while Rebecca played it on her fife. Yankee Doodle went to town riding on a pony, stuck a feather in his cap and called it macaroni. Well, I looked out. Had they seen? But no, they didn't appear to. They were still coming, so we played it louder and louder. Yankee Doodle went to town riding on a pony, stuck a feather in his cap and called it macaroni. Had they heard? Would they care if they did hear? But suddenly, the British ship fired a single shot as a signal to the smaller landing vessels to return. Our trick had worked. The British officers on board had heard us, and they thought that Rebecca and I were soldiers. And so they thought that their surprise attack was no longer a surprise. And so they decided not to attack after all. Those landing barges reached the ship, and the soldiers and sailors climbed aboard, and then they hauled up the anchor and sailed away from Scituate, never to return. Our town was saved. And I threw my arms around my sister and I said, "You are so smart." And after that, well, the townsfolk, they regarded us as heroes. They called Rebecca and I an army of two. And our story was told again and again until it finally ended up in St. Nicholas Magazine for boys and girls. And you can still hear all about us if you visit the Scituate Historical Society, which now operates our lighthouse. And as for Rebecca and I, well, we both lived good long lives, both of us living to the age of 89. And we always lived together. We ran a boarding house. But the strangest thing is that after we died, some folks say that they can still hear the sound of our fife and drum music floating above Cedar Point on the wind. And that is the end of the story.
Wonderful, my goodness. Welcome back to Speak Your Mind, folks at home. As you notice, we have a very special show today. We have Monica J. Peterson here, who is a storyteller. So our format is going to be a little bit different. We're not going to do a brainstorm, but you can go back to past episodes if you want to brainstorm it out. We are still going to have our writing prompts, and it's going to be in the form of storytelling. I just loved that piece. Oh. Thank you so much, Monica, for being here.
Oh, thank you for inviting me.
So real quick before we get into our writing prompt, so that is a true story, correct?
That is a true story, yes.
That is amazing. Now, you wrote it, though. You wrote it based on a true story?
I wrote it based on a true story. I had read an article somewhere, and it interested me, and so I began to research it. And as I researched it, the idea for the story it just began to present itself. Sometimes you get an idea, the relationship between the sisters, and it just writes itself.
Well, that's what I really like about it, because it's like combines, poetry, prose, writing, and theater, and history, which is, again, it's such a treat for us at home to be able to witness that because, if you're trying to write at home and you're thinking of what you want to write about, there's so many different forms that it can take. And I love taking real life history and turning it into something that could be creative. So you brought me a writing prompt, which I love. I love when our featured artists bring a writing prompt. And our writing prompt is a time I told a lie, which is awesome because the theme of your story, it's a lie that saved the town.
Right.
So I'm going to read mine first. I did mine in just an easy beginner format where I lined it 1 through 10. Mine did go a little bit over. I did do 20 lines. And then, again, as a special treat, Monica is going to read one of her stories, a prose story based on that writing prompt. So this is very exciting for us here. All right, so time I told a lie. So this is what, and I had to go deep for this one because I didn't want to just make it superficial. I wanted to really dig into a time I told a lie that was based on really saving myself in a certain way. All right. Was it first, second, or third grade? A blur to me now. The lie that brought down the house. The nigger house was the name of the note I crafted with crayons and rainbow stickers. Perhaps I sent it to myself to get attention, or just a harmful, innocent way to release the horror my little heart absorbed from the playground taunts and teases. Why I blamed it on the girl down the street, I'll never know. An easy target to the one who was so good to me and will never know my deep remorse, save for repentance in spirit alone.
Wow. Oh, my God.
Yeah.
That was fabulous.
Thank you. But like I said, I was thinking, okay, I can just kind of do superficial lies, and I didn't really know what the heart of your story was going to be, but based on the topic that you sent, in the Revolutionary War, I'm like, okay, I kind of have to dig a little bit deeper and really sort of bear out a lie that has haunted me in a lot of ways. Even though I was young, it was still a lie that affected a lot of people in a negative way. Now, this lie of these two sisters was a good lie that helped people, in a positive way. So you can kind of get both. So folks at home, I hope you go dig deep into your poem or your story and write a piece about a lie that you told. And you can share it with us at speakyyourmind@myyahoo.com or on the Facebook group. But now, sit back, relax, have a cup of tea, and Monica J. Peterson is going to share her story.
Okay. Well, actually, this is a little bit lighter than the first story that I told. It's a personal one. I don't lie, generally. That being said, let me tell you about the strangest lie that I ever told. My husband Mark and I were young professionals. Mark had been invited to represent his company at a party celebrating the 50th anniversary of Schnell Transportation, one of his company's top suppliers. Like the hundreds of partygoers at the event, we sailed around the Statue of Liberty at a party boat and then returned to the Grand Hyatt in Manhattan, where Schnell had arranged for us to stay. Sitting around the hotel bar, Schnell's president, Herr Mueller. Oh, Herr is the German word for Mr. Did I mention that Schnell was a German company? Well, Herr Mueller invited Mark and I to go out dancing. We were the only party-goers invited. Obviously, Mark's company business was very important to Schnell Transportation. And similarly, Mark was anxious for good relations. So we went. The Schnell team, Mark and I, piled into a limo. So cool. And headed off. We ended up at the famous nightclub, the Copacabana. Unfortunately, when we got there was a line of people outside waiting to get in, a line that wrapped around the block. Oh, this wasn't good. But Herr Mueller got out of the car and went up to talk to the bouncer at the door. This was an odd sight. Dressed in his black silk suit, Herr Mueller seemed so much more sophisticated than the other people in line, and so much older. He must have been 60, which was ancient. Smoothly, he slipped the bouncer some money, and we were quickly ushered in. But that was only the first hurdle. There were no open tables. The club was full. That's why there was such a big line outside. There was one table that was unoccupied, though, but it had a big sign that read, "Reserved." Undeterred, Herr Mueller took the sign off the table and motioned for us to sit. Well, while our group was sitting there, the maitre d' approached and politely tried to explain to Herr Mueller that the table was reserved. Herr Mueller replied in German, "Sprechen Sie Deutsch?" He was pretending he couldn't speak English. Couldn't speak English. He spoke English better than half of the people that I knew. But the maitre d' was becoming frantic. He looked around the table wildly. "You can't sit here. Doesn't anyone here speak English?" Mark and I couldn't offend our host, so Mark pretended to speak German by rattling off random German words. Words like the words for nut and bolt, and I sat there nodding at him as if he were making perfect sense. In the years between then and now, I am sure that I have told a white lie or two, but that was the strangest. The time that I sat there in my own country and pretended I didn't speak English.
Yeah, wonderful. I love it. I love it. And what I love most, again, is we do this for our folks at home, people who sit at home and they like to write or they're scared to write. They've never picked up a pen to be able to be inspired. And I do spoken word poetry, so of course I would love people to do spoken word poetry, but that's not everyone's cup of tea. So hopefully folks at home, you're seeing all the different ways that you could be creative. And again, like that, what was a light story, but told in such a performative way. And so it gives it all this different depth. So the subject matter doesn't really matter as much. You don't have to always write about things that are like war and hard times. I know sometimes in our genre of spoken word, we do get a little bit heavy, but you can just a position, a light topic within a nice narrative, and then you have something that's entertaining for everyone. So please try it at home. And I do want you to share a little bit about what you do, because again, I think storytelling in some ways is a little bit of a lost art. There are people out there that do it, but to have somebody who, you go to schools, correct, and you do private events. I know you did the festival with me. And so to see a live storyteller who's not just reading a story, but actually acting it out and putting in with the props, the drum, the costume, I think it does, bring this stuff to life. So what are the categories and stuff that you perform in?
Well, I tell stories at schools and libraries and senior centers and museums and places like that. I've got different stories for adults and for children. For adults, it's mostly my historical stories. And they often are based around holidays. Like I have a wonderful show for St. Patrick's Day. Called Forever Ireland, and I tell the true story of an Irish pirate queen. It's a great story. And in October, Italian American Heritage Month, I tell the story, An Evening with My Grandparents, which are the family stories that my grandmother and grandfather would tell me. So I have real life stories for adults. And for children, I do a variation on the story that I told just now. I do that for children, but when I do that, I will have props and I'll have puppets and also, actually, for both adults and children, I bring along photographs of what can be seen today. Because it really is amazing to see what a fabulous area that we live in. The history is still here with us, and sometimes we'll pass right by it and won't even know.
Right. That's true. Yeah. And now, do you find that like a lot of the kids want to like engage with the information and ask you like deeper questions about some of the historical aspects of it? or is the purpose more like to just entertain them, or do you combine that sort of educational aspect to it?
Well, a lot of my stories are about women who've done really extraordinary things. And so I like for young women to know that they are part of history and that people like them have done amazing things. And, that is a very interesting thing, because sometimes when women or people of color have done something extraordinary, contemporary writers will say, oh, never happened. That's what's very amazing about the story I just told, because people did say, oh, never happened. But I found contemporaneous accounts from other people who confirmed it, people who were in no way related to them, people in other towns.
Oh, wow.
There's an older woman, her name was Granny Sewell, and when she died in 1900, she had been a small child when this happened. And so in her obituary, they talk about the saddest day of her life came when she was in church one day, and somebody burst into church and said, militia, everybody come, grab your guns and come. The British are attacking Scituate again. And so, they kissed her father goodbye, figuring they would never see him again. There's a good chance in a battle he might have died. But he came back a few hours later and said, I didn't have to fight after all, because the Bates girls scared the British away with their fife and drum.
Wow.
And this was such a significant story in her life that they wrote about it in her obituary.
Wow.
This was a woman who lived in another town. She wasn't a friend of theirs.
That's cool. And either way, what I think is great about it is it gives people an opportunity to walk in someone's shoes, because it brings it to life. Like, that could have been you, or what would it have been like if it was you? Do have to wrap up. So anyone at home right now who was learning to write or wanting to write, what tips do you have for them?
Well, I guess in my case, research is a really important thing. Read everything that you can about the topic if you're doing historical work. But I think that a good part is getting down as much as you can, as quickly as you can, because I do most of my writing as rewriting. I edit and edit and edit. It's almost never done. And I'll edit for days. And I guess that's my big process is rewriting.
Beautiful. Well, thank you so much for taking us all out of our element and sharing something that is, as beginning of time. We're storytellers, so it's great to see it live in action here at the studio. And please come back and visit us again. Thank you all. Come back next week for Speak Your Mind. Thank you, Monica J. Peterson. You can find her at monicajpeterson.com.
That's right.
Thank you. Thank you.
Bye-bye.